We are we are ready to go, and I'm pleased to welcome our chair, Morten Elving, who you now have known for a day and a half, and is giving his keynote presentation. And I just want to say it'll be a great one. So, over to you.
Thank you. So there's nothing I don't get to do these 2 days, so I hope you will bear with me. I've actually really been looking forward to giving this presentation. It's a continuation of the presentation I gave last year, which was about collaborative lean portfolio management. And then I learned when I met Eben, who is a researcher at the Danish University, that actually we are talking about open strategy or emergent strategy, what also a lot of you have been talking about. So what I wanted to do today is not to sell this to you or not to try to convince you, but actually ask by showing you what I have seen if you see some of the same things. So really interested to also continue this conversation afterwards. So the dramatic topic is how digitization, hope, and fear invite an open and emergent approach to strategy. Let me see, where's the error here? Oh, that doesn't work. This works. And I'll basically go through the why, the what, and the how. And the how will be unusually practical. So this is one of the things which for me is really fascinating. We think this idea of more openness, it's going to take 100 people, 100 years to make that transformation. But actually you can get started in a few days. And I think we start to learn the simple things we can do to start that journey without too much drama, which is what I would also like to hear your feedback on. So first a little bit about open strategy. Like Peter Compo, the author of a book called The Emergent Approach to Strategy, told when I spoke with him is that, we talk about traditional cadenced chevron approach to strategy, but actually today there is no modern approach to strategy that doesn't accept openness and emergence, right? Everybody has been talking about it. So it's not a new thing. Traditionally, open strategy has been to invite people into big rooms, like the ones you can rent from Daniel if he's still around, but like big rooms and a lot of people, digital platforms, thousands of people contributing to the strategy. So the inclusion and the transparency has been what defined it. What I did last year with portfolio management was to ask, what actually happens when you accept not an ordered worldview, but an unordered worldview? How will that change? So in a way, it's the same question I asked today for strategy. I used to work for Nokia. It was actually an amazing company to work for. The coolest thing was that you never needed to explain your kids and family what you were doing. They actually were really happy. I got a new mobile phone every month or so, and when I left Nokia in 2011, I still remember, and with some regret actually, I carried this big box of all the model back to the place where you handed those in and left them behind. But it was a really cool period. And I didn't actually want to talk about this because you all know it, we have been talking about it. But the thing with downfalls like this is that they always come as a surprise, even if they shouldn't. They always go faster than you can imagine, even if they are rather slow, and they're always worse than you can imagine. So there's really no lower limit to how bad things can go. Something the Danish professor, Ben Flyvbjerg, has documented in his book, how big things get done. There's no lower limit to how bad things can do. There's no upper limit either, which is kind of fascinating. But on the downside, it's unlimited. So, do you see what I see? So what I see is some forces at play. And I have heard people speak about them here. So talking about the digitization, the fear and the hope. So digitization today, I would say, is actually liberating more than enslaving. In the Danish public sector, there's a lot of debate about hot hands versus cold hands, and that doctors and nurses spend all their time feeding the data-hungry systems with a lot of data that, to our earlier points, nobody really knows what to use. But that's actually changing. We have become smarter at collecting the right information. We even have automation of that process. So I would say we are at a time where technology is truly liberating rather than enslaving, which basically means that we can organize in new ways with new degrees of freedom. Then, like pointed out every second time I ask, change over change, turbulence is going faster and faster, which means that no matter what your strategy looks like, you will have to repaint it at some point in time. That's on the fear side. And then on the hope side, it's something that's a little bit surprising for me, but I heard someone talk about the World Economic Forum last year, that actually people of the planet are looking to companies to save the planet. They have given up on politicians, they have given up on a lot of other things. So basically the only hope we have left are us who work for bigger companies, that our companies will do good for the planet. And that leads to new responsibility. It actually leads to a whole new set of ethical and moral requirements that nobody asked for and probably nobody wanted, but suddenly you see CEOs in rainbow t-shirts and stuff like that, and that's not going to go away. So those are think of as the forces, and what does it mean? Not to try to be logical, but it basically means that because of the increased speed, that there is an increased need for avoidance. It's not what you want, it's actually to make sure that you don't kill yourself in the process that becomes relatively important. The broad involvement is also driven by a need, because 4 eyes see better than 2. So it's not a process of democratization, it's actually a needed process to get more eyes on the ball and to get information to flow faster, that you need the openness in the organization. Then there's also an interesting shift in time perspective. I started to talk about this as the alignment paradox. And honestly, I don't know if somebody else came up with it, but for me, the alignment paradox is that you align to realign. So we used to define strategy execution as aligning strategy to execution. Of course, we want to create impact. That's the value side. But now it's also the avoidance side, is that you need to be able to pretty quickly shift when things are changing. Which leads to a shift in the balance between strategy and execution, something that someone else also pointed out, that actually pretty much changes everything. On the hot versus cold hands, the interesting thing is that Elon Musk goes for 100%, and it's not cold hands. So he basically wants 100% of the people who work for him to be production-facing. Or in a typical organization, you can talk about production or client-facing, but not doing administration. So just to tee it up, a picture on the drive versus avoidance. Had a bit of fun. Of course, value. I mean, that's what strategy is all about, is to find the value. However, you need to be more focused also on managing your risk, which is the avoidance side. So it gives a bit of a dual perspective, avoid versus drive. So we can look at it like this. I had some fun, so I hope you will appreciate it. It's the model called Kinefin that's behind the scenes here. But you can say that strategy is like painting a map while you are driving on the road. So one perspective is like the view from a clear mountaintop. I'm not sure how well that fits with the idea of driving, but there is a nice road there as well. So you really have a full perspective to see how things are going. Then there's the more landscape, a little bit more narrow perspective, but you still sort of have a map that kind of works. Then there's the off-road thing. There's still like a sandy roads. Maybe you're going to the beach with your surfboard on the board. It's a little bit difficult to find the road, but you have some good tools to guide you. And then maybe suddenly you find yourself in the water and the GPS works no more, and all you can care about is getting out. Or you might be a little bit confused in a good way. Is this the right way, or is that the right way? Yesterday we had an exercise, which I thought was fun, where we were lining up and trying to follow 2 other people. And actually I'm really surprised how stable it was, because normally it's a bit more chaotic. So it's an exercise you use to demonstrate complexity, which is about hidden variables, right? Nobody really knows who the other guys are following. So when someone you're following suddenly goes to the other end of the room, it might lead the whole room to go crazy, but then it stabilizes again. So you can do those types of exercises. An exercise for something simple would be, please organize yourself on a line alphabetically after your first name. A little bit more complicated could be, please put yourself on a line using an economical scale. And then people will say, what does that mean? And then they start taking coins out of their pocket and see how much cash do they have on them, and then they organize to that, they figure it out. So different types of situations. So with that in mind, where would you actually like to be? Well, I think we would all like to be on the mountaintop with a clear view. And that's also a little bit what you have built into the cascading approach. However, The typical numbers for people who don't understand strategy is something like 90 to 95%. So that means that less than 1 out in 10 will probably be able to demonstrate what it is if you ask them. And you see these numbers from many places. For leaders, it's typically half and half. So you can almost safely say that you can assume that people are not listening when you try to communicate strategy, right? At least only 1 out of 10 will get it. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but it really seems like the cadenced approach is not really doing it for the strategy communication. Potentially taken a little bit too far to the other side, it actually looks a bit more like you are here. PricewaterhouseCoopers sent out an amazing report in 2017 where they talk about leaders being confused, which according to the model I'm using is actually a healthy state, but you shouldn't stay there for 20 years. So it's healthy to not know what to do, but leaders seems to be a little bit confused around this. Many people talk about that. Roger Martin directly says that 85% of strategy is useless. Maybe the fact that a lot of companies are also to some degree struggling explains what they are doing, because there's nothing that aligns better than the willingness to live another day. So there's some alignment in the crisis situation. And then we have from Bain numbers saying that most leaders feel constrained by internal matters rather than external matters. So it's not the market opportunity that holds them back, it's actually the fact that there's a lot of other things in their way to get things done. Does this resonate a little bit? So where do you want to be? Well, you actually pretty much want to be in the middle, which is accepting that things are changing, but you still can have a bearing. So not too much strategy and not too little. In Denmark, we have a rule for the perfect size of pastry. So a size of pastry needs to be so that if you eat one, you want more, but if you eat 2, you wish you never did. So 1 is too little and 2 is too much. That's how you got to size it. So also in this situation, coming back to the strategy, you actually want to have alignment only so that you can reorientate. That starts to be the new purpose. And how can you do that, might you ask? Which is what we will look at now. But first I want you to meet some new friends, which is the kind of surprises that can meet you. And if you see a 4th category, I would love to hear it. But when I discussed with ChatGPT the other night, we came to that these 3 are pretty good. So the first one is the emperor's new clothes. It's something that everybody can see, but nobody dares to talk about. Something that you have been living with for a long time that's just growing on you, and suddenly you realize, OMG, that person should wear some actual clothes. Then there are the things that comes like sudden shifts from outside, like changes of weather. COVID is not a bad example of that. And of course you can say that somebody saw it. I mean, there were some guys who got immensely rich by selling their shares on the right day. But most of us didn't really see it coming, except afterwards, right? Then you were asking yourself, why didn't I see that coming? At least I remember having that argument with myself. And I didn't sell those shares. And then there's the new opportunities. I saw it in a book the other day that somebody said that those are a little bit like rabbits running around in the office. And when you have a stringent following the plan, then you kind of see the rabbits, but you ignore them and keep doing what you're doing. But what he's encouraging is actually that you should be curious about it and say, oh wow, it looks like there is a green rabbit running there in the corner. Wonder what that can be. And explore that and figure out what it is. So these are surprises, things that emerge on you, either things you should have known, but for some reason haven't, the things that you just don't see coming, like a flashlight from the blue sky, or something that emerges out of the floor in the office that suddenly it seems like there's a new thing you can do and maybe it's a good thing to explore. And of course this happens all when you're on the road, so there's no stopping the time. Strategy for me, I like the military analogy, and I'm looking for a better one, but I like this idea that strategy is about maximum force on weakest point or biggest opportunity. That cut it for me. And it's got to be the best plan you have for future survival and future prosperity. And it resonates quite well with other people. I was almost saying other clever people, but I don't want to say that. So it matches with what clever people say about it. There is no common definition for strategy. It's one of the things that people actually argue about. And Peter Combo wrote a new book where he read all the strategy books and said, now I make the perfect definition. And in my head, it just means that now we have one more. So the world doesn't really agree around this. Open strategy is also strategy, but the purpose of open strategy is to avoid doing crazy things when you could have known better. So it's the duality. Strategy, yes, and keep yourself on the road at all cost. So it also means that it takes a bit of a more explorative approach, keep options open, and repaint reality as it emerges. Sometimes I joke and say that you can almost start with a blank piece of paper as your strategy, because as things are changing and you put them on the paper, then before you know it, you will actually have a perfectly valid strategy, and it didn't really matter where you started from. Of course, that's not the way to do it. I actually really appreciate, Ricardo, the story you told. For me, that's a sign of the emergent approach, that you can work with many aspects of it as things are changing, but of course everything doesn't change. So if you look at it, the open strategy traditionally inclusion transparency. If you take it to the complex side, it also got to mean adaptability, so that's an implied attribute. It was also you, Ricardo, who said you have to lean before you digitize. I call it unmess. I mean, it doesn't really help to augment and automate all your bureaucracy, right? You shouldn't have two bureaucratic robots feeding each other. That's really not what you want to do. So you just got to simplify before you can start doing some of these things. And then the unfiltered thing is about having a system where information can pass unfiltered. So openness, no, it's not for democratization. It's not the leaderless organization. You can do that, but it's actually not necessary. The openness is for information to be able to pass unfiltered. So how can you do that? That's what I spoke about last year, so I'm not going to beat it to death here. But basically there are three things which are quite logical. And again, I don't really know a fourth that would fit here. So clarity of intent is to have a collaboration. It can be one person, your head of strategy, or it can be the whole organization, doesn't really matter. But you got to have an idea of where you're going so that you are aligned, you protect that alignment. Then build fitness is much more important than people think. I've been in organizations where everybody knows that the team next door is not really at the game, but you can't talk about it because it's unspeakable, right? You would offend them and you would bring yourself into a situation that it's not useful to go there because you know that nothing would happen. What Build Fitness is about is actually about having an accepted agenda to talk about how well can we carry our strategy, what can we do better than we are doing today? How can we keep optimizing the game? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right strategy? Do we have the right way to work about it? So the way I started talking about this, and it's also what we played a bit with in the workshop, is that do you have a useful collaborative structure? Can you even work together in this organization? And how can you keep perfecting that in all aspects of the word? Then the alignment of contributions is a strategy conversation. So that's an idea that instead of cascading strategy, you actually ask people, how do you see the strategy? What are you doing to work for that strategy? And what kind of help do you need to get there? Which means that strategy is emerging up. You can put it on a flip chart and you can talk about it and you ask yourself, is that where we want to go, or should we change a little bit and take another road towards the beach? I know this is not pretty, but it has a point. So on the right-hand side, so this is actually about farming emergence, surfacing tensions, your new billion-dollar hobby. I forgot to make that point with the emergence thing, but actually there's a lot of money in seeing these weak signals just a little bit earlier. So what you will ask on top of the questions is a bit like, is this still adding up? It's a bit like a reconciliation question. Do all our plans add up, or do we have too much on the table, or are we missing something? Have we seen something? Is there a rabbit in the corner or a flashlight coming that would lead us to change things? And are we actually able to work usefully around that? On the left-hand side, about the rabbits and the thunderballs. So the interesting thing is that if you have a mess, you don't see the rabbit, right? Or you don't see the bad weather coming, or you don't see the naked guy in the corner in the emperor's new clothes. Or maybe you do, but you decided to look another way, which at least I would do. So only when things are unmessed, you can actually see clearly. And we have some interesting statistics from technical inspections where you ask experts to review technical documents from different perspectives. And when they meet and compare their notes, and there should be nothing more to find. I mean, what a waste of time. Why don't you send them by email? But actually the process of listening to the other people make new findings emerge. And the statistic is that if you do that really well, then about 20% of your final finding will come from what we call the logging meeting itself. And while all of this is a little bit old school, it still shows that only by having people show up really well prepared, planning to bring no surprises, how they contribute, what they are doing for it, and what they need from others, then someone can say that, well, actually that Christmas is not on the day we wanted, right? It's like a week into the new year, and that's not going to work for us. So the conversation, I almost covered this already, so I'll not go through it in so much detail, but the conversation is a bit like a big room planning. We had some conversations with some of you here, and I think some of you are doing similar things. So the idea is actually that you bring a large group of people together, and you have them share how they see the situation. And the cost people will say, what a waste of time. I mean, why don't you just send the manager? But that's not the point. So the point is actually to have information to reconcile where it doesn't need to leave the heads where it's living. Okay, you don't want those handovers. You don't want to put it into the database and someone to read it out. The Chinese whisper type of thing, or broken telephone is a more appropriate name. You want people to be there representing the view and seeing for themselves if that view doesn't reconcile with other available information. And you can set it up a bit like this. I have done this many times. It's a way of recombining things that you're already doing. So the most important thing is sponsorship. So no one succeeds with this without having very high-level executive sponsorship, because there's a billion reasons for not to do this. And the reason why I told you that I'm not trying to convince you or sell this to you is that I have tried that and it doesn't go super well. So you can only do this if you have power behind you. And then you need a good facilitator, which is something your former agile coach can help with if they have nothing to do. So setting this up, in a way, getting this conversation started, if you have a crisis situation, it might even be recommendable that you can do this in a day or a week. If you want to do it a little bit more well-prepared, at least in a month you can get going. The clarity of intent, boiling your strategies down into something comprehensible, is a useful activity under all circumstances. You can do that too. And the fitness conversation is something I would say that every company needs to do no matter what. So these are all good things, and you probably do a lot already. What we found, and some of you have also been speaking to this, is when you start this unmessing process or the leading process, you find a lot of activities that are not really fitting in your plans. So that's the easiest thing of all, to make it visible so that it can be challenged. But don't confuse that by clever intervention. It's just there's too much stuff going on, and anyone who bothers to look can find it. So you get that process going. The pivotal moment for me is actually on the day of the contribution alignment, when you have all these people in the room and they listen to what the other people are doing. And a lot of them will leave the room saying, wow, this is the best overview I have ever had of what we are doing. It's the one thing that always happens the first time people try this. And there's no place they can go and get that information. So the trick is that have people prepare relatively detailed presentations, make those presentations public, and they too will be probably the best report you ever saw, because you also got a chance to listen to the ideas presented. So it becomes a frame of reference for you to go and see what the other guys are doing, and you will have heard the story for how it's going on. So that's how you can get this going. I think we talked about all of these three things: setting up the alignment conversation, taking all your strategies. It's actually an amazingly fun process, because normally people don't get strategy. So when you, for example, take the OKRs, which I really like, I know there are people who don't do it, but I think that's a super useful way to get started. So you take all your strategies, the technology strategy, the sustainability strategy, the this strategy, and the that strategy, and put them on the table and say, hey, can we get some operational objectives on the table and put some key results on them that we can start guiding our execution to those objectives. And the first thing that happens is that people realize that actually from this strategy it's impossible to make numerical targets. So it leads to instant revision of some of the most cast in iron strategies that you have. I've heard more than once, this conversation is too much. It's too early. But I'm just wondering, when is the time right? I mean, what do we have to lose by trying? I mean, none of what I showed you is going to cost more than what you probably burn on things you shouldn't do anyway. So it's a reconfiguration. It's not a transformation. My colleagues do not like this, but it is really quite simple things you need to do. And then there are other things you need to do that takes time. So what you need to do with this is that you need to do the data cleansing. You need to have your digital platform in order. You need to have your technology to liberate you, which is what we love to help you with. But this conversation is something that can only be built from the inside. And the thing is that if you don't get this going, then you actually don't really get your digitization process going either. One feeds the other, but you cannot build this from the tool side. It's got to come as a reconfiguration of how you work, as a liberation. Gary Hamel would love this, and I think he does, because it's really a war against bureaucracy. It's a transformation from cold hands to hot hands. So in summary, the takeaways, and I'm not really good at making slides, but I worked a lot on this, so I hope you will appreciate it. On the digitization, the fear, and the hope. So digitization is your friend. If technology today is not liberating you, then I don't think you're doing the right thing. The fear thing is that nobody wants to become the next Nokia. It's horrible what happened to that company, but it happened for a reason. And now when looking back, I could see it, and I have spent a lot of time, because it's amazing with those cases where you're a part of it without seeing it emperor's new clothes, and then reflect back and see what's going on. So I think it was arrogance, and it was missing the ecosystem game that Nokia lost out. Nokia charged developers like 100,000 euros for access to the development platform before they had any revenue guaranteed, right? Good luck with that, and it didn't work either. So this ability to be aligned so you can realign and have the orchestrated pivots, that's actually business agility. It's more important than ever. It means being able to change your mind without risking the company or your job. On the hope side, your new billion-dollar hobby, looking for the weather changes and the naked people and the rabbits, there's a lot of money in spotting that early, and you can save a lot of embarrassment from the people who needs to dress differently. And this is what these collaborations are all about. So just looking for the top, the avoidance thing is actually not about risk avoidance, because value is in risk. It's about balanced risk-taking. One of my former Nokia colleagues said something I have always kept with me. It's managing at the speed you can afford to lose, which is why a sprint is 2, 3, 4 weeks. Everybody can afford to throw a sprint away, but you wouldn't like to miss a quarterly period for all the teams. So the Danish pastry rule, right? 1 is too little, 2 is too much. Manage at the speed you can afford to lose. Broad and open collaboration, strategy and demand, and that's pretty much what changes everything. I can see Robert's angry eyes, and thank you.
First question from the online attendees. First question is from Olga. Morten, what would you say is step 1 to implement the open strategy mindset in the C-suite?
So what I would personally do is that I would set up that strategy conversation. I've done that quite many times. When I worked in Nokia, in the team I was in, the feature platform, which I would say is the last successful generation, the one you could drop on the floor and only needed to charge once a week. I worked for the head of that platform, and he brought his team together every month for 5 years to meet and talk about what they were doing. And he was there in the front row. He didn't leave for 2 days when he was listening to this, about 30 presentations. So I have seen this work. So that's where I would start anytime. Then I would start on the strategy purification. Actually, the exercise of defining OKRs is a super fun exercise to do, and you can put them into Jira Align right afterwards, which is not a bad idea either. And then I would definitely get going on the muscle thing. So in Nokia, we called these operational reviews. So we invited CJ leaders to come and tell us what they were doing 2 at a time or 1 at a time, to just talk through how things are going and how we could make sure that everything which was needed was there.
Any questions from the people in the room? I will throw a random. Oh, do you have a question?
I was hoping you could expand a bit on your term unmessed, like practically what that looks like. It sounds obviously like cleaner data and conversations about that data, but just looking for a little bit more context around that.
So it actually came from a huge argument with one of my colleagues. We were discussing would this work for a client or not, and it helped me build a key part of the argument. So what you often find if you go and look for where do people talk about strategy, you will find a lot of meetings where people talk about what are the objectives. So that's a bit of a fragmentation. And the interesting thing is that quite often in those meetings they talk about what they talk about in the other meetings. So it also becomes some sort of a hotpot for political stuff and opinion and guessing and whatever. So what we actually agreed on was that if you take all of these little pieces of strategy conversation and put them into one room, which is the contribution conversation, then you wouldn't need to guess about what the other guys are guessing about, right? Because they would be there. So you could have one conversation to rule them all, usually, instead of that. And if you do that well, maybe you don't need to have those little meetings here and there and everywhere.
Yes, what would be your contribution to the hot topics?
Thank you. So it was really, for me, quite amazing to see the similarity between the forces I spoke about and this. So for me, the one is the thing that strategy and execution becomes one. Someone called it the strategy ops, DevOps type of thing coming together. So the thing is that they come together, but of course they are still different. So I think of this as a dance, or some philosophers talk about the strategy conversation. Donna Meadows, a famous system thinker, talked about the dance of complexity. So the presentation that had the ABBA thing, for me that was like 2 steps in that dance. So it's already there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.